Hello, Frode.
That was pretty strange. Problems connecting. Hey, how are you?
Pretty good. But I'm gonna be in the kitchen today because I have some cooking to do.
Okay.
Let me see if I can leave this here. I'll probably leave my audio off most of the time.
That's fine. We will be talking a bit about the 10 million documents today, I think, generally. So that will be interesting. I think Dave DeRoer might be joining, someone I know from here, who has really interesting perspectives on this. You know, the ancient Chinese curse, be careful what you wish for, right?
Yes. I just saw the heading of your last email. You mentioned something about removing extensions, right? From Visual Meta.
Yeah. Let me just see here. Yeah, that's, let me just open it up. Yeah, all I've done is we had a kind of a, oh, here's Peter. I'll address that point in a minute. Peter, are you here fully?
Yes.
Okay, so I don't think Mark will be joining us today. So it's really you and Raphael who are the core Visual Meta detail people. So I just wanted to explain the previous email, which was I removed the extensions bit because I think it only makes it useful for us. Let me just share my screen and show you why. Hang on a second. Boom, that's nice. Participants can see a screen. Yeah, I know that. I'm just going to give Dave an invitation link. Dave does amazing work in this area. So, oh, Dave DeRoer is here too. Awesome. Okay, boom. So, hello, Dave.
Yeah.
That makes me sound like hell.
I don't know if the lag is from my end or it's coming from you, Fred, but you're choppy kind of a bit.
Sound or visual or both, guys? Well, let me ask Dave, because you're in the UK. Am I okay to you sound-wise?
Yes, you're fine. I don't know that I'm the best judge because I'm not on the best connection, but you seem okay.
Oh, okay, good. Yeah, I was just going to something that's a bit boring for you, but try to do it really briefly. That is, I had a meeting with Dave Millard this morning, who is my main supervisor, and he helped me simplify some Visual Meta stuff, which I wanted to have done before this call. And all we have done is that if you look at my screen here, this is the structure. At the top, we have an introduction just saying Visual Meta heading, then there's boilerplate text, which introduces it, saying, hello, this is what we call Visual Meta. It's a plain text introduction for anybody to read. So the changes between the Visual Meta start and Visual Meta end, we have a mandatory header and we have a mandatory BibTeX self-citation bit. That is exactly the BibTeX that will be in the download page of the document. If that's not in there, it's not Visual Meta. But in between that, we have these optional fields, which are document type, author details, references, etc. These are just there now. They're no longer segregated under yet another level down, because that just got complicated. So before we start, as another piece and final piece of context, the reply that we got from our dear colleague Chris Guttridge about metadata is both completely true and completely useless. And I say that with loving respect because we've been fighting over this for quite a few years. Because obviously the specific metadata is what gives the specific affordances. So what we have here is what we just discussed, how to cite the document. We also have under document type all kinds of goodies. well, have I messed up a link I have here? But yeah, so we have the author details. That's so that you can cite the person without having the issue that you often have with BibTeX, where the names can be back to front. But we also have all the references that this document cites. And the headings, I have to defend that a little bit, because in my experience, when doing basic analysis of a single document, if you can see the headings and contents, in context, when you do a search or show only names and so on, headings are very useful. We also allow embedding of glossaries, explicit endnotes, and we could even have the full document to help with analysis. So that's the beginning of what we have. So I thought that might help seed the discussion. Dave, since you are kind of the newest, is there anything you would like to say to start?
I know this has actually been quite helpful to see this in action in its latest form. I'm probably a bit out of date, so thank you. It's fantastic. You want me to say anything about your sort of task from Vint about the video?
Yes, I'm just writing myself a note because there was a fixed link to header. I was going to do that while you were talking, and now you'll see it coming up in the left-hand corner. Well, this is the thing. Vint has been extremely supportive of this work. Hang on, I just want to check. We are recording, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, because I can't see it in this view. And he is the one who pushed through so that ACM now is trialing Visual Meta on the ACM Hypertext 21 conference proceedings, which is nice. Adam Verne, who unfortunately is not here today, has done some real work together with Mark Anderson's database that is Visual Meta derived or derivable to show bigger things. So when Vint sent this email about this humanities and supercomputing, it gave me a huge amount of stress because, you know, it's like that Chinese curse, be careful what you wish for. Now, in a way, as I sent it to you guys, let's pretend there's 10 million of these documents. Okay, on average, globally, I think it's 2 million academic documents a year. So 5 years worth of everyone in the whole world doing exactly what we want. To put it in Doug's terms, what value can we derive from that? And I don't want it just to be analysis where, you know, press button and you get a magic result. I don't want it to just be sentiment analysis and that kind of stuff. I'm wondering, because we have both structural and connective metadata, what further interactions can we dream of?
Well, to give a quick reaction, I mean, firstly, as I said in my email, we could probably find some other collections with some similar characteristics to see what people have done with them. The person you need for that really is Pip Wilcox, actually, because that's her area. But you know, I've been working in computational methods in humanities for a long time, and there's a traditional problem that certainly the scientists, the hard scientists, regard us as having very small data sets in comparison to, you know, the Square Kilometre Array Radio Telescope or mass spectrometers or something. But actually, you don't need size to need computational power. There's all sorts of challenging things. In humanities, we have diverse content, we have inconsistent content, we have issues of provenance. We're working in multiple languages. There's so very much to do. So there is quite a lot of work on computational methods in humanities. And the question for me is, what could I see being applied here? As you say, you know, what are the benefits of bringing those methods to this particular collection that would be cool for a video in the context of Vint's talk? That is an interesting challenge. And as you say, it's something to do with structure, probably. That's one of the things. I mean, the classic sort of digital humanities approach to this would be to talk about distant reading, about, you know, sort of computational processing of the text and so on. It's not going to require a supercomputer to do that on its own. How this corpus then interlinks with another corpus, maybe. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. That's the kind of thinking we're looking at, because I don't want Vint to be kind of embarrassed just by showing a tiny little thing. Of course, we could use the excuse that, you know, a laptop today is a supercomputer from 10 years ago. But, you know, if we really throw computation behind it, and we have let's forget the details of visual meta. Let's just think about, we have documents that know what they are, what they contain, and how they connect. What different information landscapes could that create for us? Poetically, it's kind of easy to think about, but in more useful terms, what could that do?
What's the current status of the ACM digital library and people processing it computationally? I don't, is all the data available to anyone? I actually don't know.
It's very, this call is being recorded. It's not as clear as it could. And Mark Anderson, for the basic set that he did, he downloaded a lot of stuff by hand and then he put it into a database. But they have been very supportive of us doing visual meta, which makes it much more extractable. Phil from scholarcy.com has put in visual meta extraction from PDFs, and he says it changes the game and makes it so much easier. And we have this hypertext one. We're now working on doing web science for early next year. So that'll be a bigger set. So that kind of helps with the bigger thinking, doesn't it?
Yeah, and I don't know what the size of the ACM digital library is, but I imagine it's actually sizable at this stage.
Yeah, I'd note that Mark Anderson had to do a lot of manual authority control work. That was a major issue in the data set when he was going through it.
Interesting. Yeah, that's a fair 2 million pages is enough. Other places will have bigger numbers, but
yeah, exactly. So Dave, you've been dreaming in this space for quite a long time, and you've been on the ground, so to speak. What are the kind of things that just seems like this data is a mess, we can't do such and such with it?
Well, one of the areas of work, I mentioned in my email that I'm sort of in the loop on a national UK discussion about digital infrastructure. And we wrote a report, maybe it was 2 years ago now, it's called the Exascale report. It's about supercomputing across many different disciplines. And I was the editor of social science, arts and humanities on that. And we had a number of use cases. So I think I'm going to look, just coming at it purely from a supercomputing end, I'll look back on that. But one of them was essentially computational linguistics or corpus linguistics, for doing analysis of the text. Another one on the social science side was very much about interlinking. And it would be really cool if your video is playing to hypertext and it's playing to web sites, especially if those are the proceedings in case. But it is a piece of web science to look at the interlinking of all these documents. So there's quite a hypertexty thing here. Then no-brainer for using computation and also raising the temperature of the planet is using machine learning techniques somewhere. If we where do we want to train an AI in this? I'll just throw that open.
Yeah, fair point with the plus and the minus.
Maybe an authority control. That might help. It's so I don't know how we ever got to the convention of just abbreviating people's first names to a single letter. It's just utterly maddening. It's guaranteed to cause nothing but nightmares down the road.
Yeah.
Someone's trying to save a few drops of ink at some point, and it was a major wrong turn.
And I suppose we can disambiguate. Is this true? Can we disambiguate by using ORCID, for example?
Yeah, if we get everyone to use ORCID, but then we still have all the legacy documents that don't have ORCID IDs attached to them.
Yeah.
Dave, this is how we're looking at doing that. Each author has an explicit list of attributes that may or may not be filled in. And anybody can add to it. So let's say name in Chinese. You can put Chinese characters in, whatever you might want to do. So it has ORCID ID or the stuff that normally would be in an academic paper. But we're making it structurally available.
That's good. And then this overcomes some of those classic issues of people changing institution, changing name, but retaining their identity as a human being.
Yeah, so then we can use these big computers to match things. If something's changed here, does that mean the person changed that, or does it mean it's an error in the record? All that good fun stuff.
The big Web of Science, Scopus, and so on have to deal with this. Google Scholar has to deal with this.
Mhm.
And they've got various approaches. It's a classic one for me because my surname gets formatted about 4 different ways in different papers. And you can't find my H index because there are 3 of me.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because I'm often become D.Ruhr, and sometimes I'm Ruhr, comma something, sometimes I'm D.Ruhr, comma something, sometimes I have a space, sometimes I don't, or sometimes I have some other character. It's a complete mess. I am the walking edge case.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
That is very interesting. So I know some of the, we have Raphael and Peter here who are regulars. Some of the other regulars, because of the cold summertime, are not here. I know that some people in the group are gamers. And I think games are such a good analogies for this. I mean, Battlefield 2042 just been delayed. You look at the trailers and it's just insane, the interactive environments. So, who's joining us? Carl is joining us. Very good. So I'm kind of wondering, without just being like Lawnmower Man or Minority Report, how we may be able to interact with huge data sets where every single point has these attributes. Hi, Carl.
Hello.
I just gone around a couple of rounds, so to speak, and now we're kind of back to the what can we do when data knows what it is.
Okay.
I mean, Peter, in your world of law and writing, I guess there are specific attributes of something like this that would be useful. I mean, you've been such a help in making this a reality to begin with.
Yeah, legal citation is something of a nightmare because it was entirely structured around publication by large publishers and minimizing, again, how many drops of ink you have to use to express citations. So we had a system called the Blue Book, and it defined abbreviations for every single tribunal in the nation that made decisions and every single law-related journal and law review. And in order to properly cite something, you'd literally have to go into the Blue Book and look up what the correct abbreviation is for the particular thing, and then you'd use the cryptic abbreviation. Then when you're reading something, unless it's one of the more common ones, you have to run to the Blue Book to look up what the abbreviation means in order to expand that back out into a real name. Instead of just numbering the tribunals or doing something sensible, if we had people with a computational background who were building that system, it turned into an utter nightmare. But it was very good because it allowed the big legal publishers to get a monopoly lock on key numbers, which are basically, it was a key number system developed by West, which was essentially attaching numbers to legal topics so that you could find all of the cases that their expert indexers had associated that topic number with. So you'd look up the key number, but that was completely proprietary. Also, you had the courts themselves declaring that certain private publishers were the legitimate source of authority for law, and therefore you needed to find the page numbers as they were numbered by West Publishing in order to properly cite into a case. Again, total nightmare. We can do it so much better now. Fortunately, more and more people have been waking up to that in the law, and their efforts to come up with an alternative open source book describing the citation system itself, but we're still locked in to all these legacy sites. So it's almost the same problem as not having any visual meta in the existing ACM database. So it worked at the time, and it was very good when everyone was using the same printed volumes produced by the same publisher. It was efficient. But in the current world, when we want to start providing access to the law for people who do not have major law firms behind them that can afford to maintain all of these big libraries, it makes no sense at all. And law students today don't even use the key number system. Everyone just uses Boolean search, or they rely on the AI that's starting to be built in to some of the publishing platforms. There's one company called, I'm blanking on the name right now, but there's a company that's doing bibliometric visualizations of the case law. And their approach is to take a look at how many times a case gets cited in opinions written by other judges. And then in the visualization, it will make a circle representing the case on a graph that basically has one axis as time, the other axis as being frequency of citation. And it will even change the size of the dots to indicate which cases are hot. So you can very quickly visually zoom right in and find out, okay, which are the key opinions that I should be reading. Then it has a little semi-AI system that will look to see whether that case has been heavily criticized in recent opinions, and it will flag an opinion as being suspicious if it thinks that there's a chance that it's been overturned. It's not the same as having the West corporate indexers go in and actually read the opinions and determine that it has been overturned, but it uses a computational approach to give enough indicia for you to go out and double check yourself to make sure. And as a result, that reduces the cost of legal research tremendously and helps to start opening up access to the law for people, again, who don't have formal legal training. It's easier to go into these kinds of databases if you can get access and zoom in on stuff very quickly.
Yeah, it sounds like a bit of a mess.
Very much so.
Yeah. But Dave, in academia, just plain normal academia, especially the humanities, which is the second part of Vince's thing, what do you think would change if, let's say, just in the UK, all documents had these attributes? What could we then do?
I think it's a brilliant thought experiment. I mean, some of the things that I think of that we could talk about doing with computation and collections like this, I can't differentiate from what Google could do anyway with the tools Google uses. I mean, if Google assimilated all this content and provided search and other tools over it in the style they do with Google Books or such like, then there's a particular very clear offering there. And I'm wondering, I think it's an excellent question, because what you're offering here isn't an alternative to Google. It's an alternative interface. I think that could be the thing to major on. Maybe is it the HCI side of this, as it were, or how it fits our workflows, or something very human.
I think you're right. In addition to let's put it this way, the document APIs, the way the document announces itself to the world, it's a lot easier to parse than, having to use Magic or ML or something. So I think part of the user group, part of the opportunity here is that more people can make more tools to get more out of it.
That's interesting. So it becomes a sort of a platform for innovation.
Yeah. That's what we're trying.
The company I was alluding to is Fastcase, and I just put their URL in the chat.
Oh, thank you.
Thanks.
So they're doing the most exciting work, and they're really light years ahead of West Publishing, even though West has all of that proprietary data in their hands.
Great.
Yeah, so I mean, one thing that was shocking to me, becoming a student in my old age, was how difficult it is to do a citation tree or timeline or whatever you want to call it. I thought that would be automatic, but clearly not. So, we're trying to do this kind of thing. And when I did the first survey for my PhD, the thing that came up that PhD students have the biggest problem is the same as all students, seeing connections. So I'm wondering if making it like this means that more people can develop more tools to help these problems.
I think that's a good angle.
And I've always wanted to see online public access catalogs that would allow their end user populations to annotate them. And that'd be tremendous. I had discussions with librarians, and I've gotten so much pushback from that because of the sense that, but that wouldn't be authoritative. Oh my God, what if an end user put something that was incorrect into the system? Oh, we can't risk that. Because it's very hard to give up the role of being the gatekeeper.
Yes, and I suppose the other end of that spectrum is Wikipedia, the social edition, as it's called in humanities, where it's a different notion of authority, but you have the full edit history.
Hmm.
Yeah. I think that's very interesting about annotation.
Yeah, it is. Another benefit that documents being able to express their what they're about. I mean, there was a while with even Microsoft Word, when you saved it, you can put down the author name and all of that stuff. And it seems to have faded partly because you couldn't actually get it back. There was no natural interaction for you to search using these terms. But one thing as a teacher I found really boring is reading student work. So the idea is that if the student work is very clearly structured, it should be easier to mark them. So in a way, if it helps the teacher, it should help all readers of material, right? It makes the document differently readable. Of course, you don't need a supercomputer for that aspect, but you can then call forth different connections in different ways, I guess.
Oh, I also posted into the chat a link to the Indigo book, which is the open source attempt to duplicate documentation for the citation system without running afoul of any of the copyrights owned by the citation system copyright holders. So basically it came up with new examples of all of the styles and a different organization to put it all together so that you can access the system of citation that's used by the courts without having to go through the bottleneck of the one proprietary choke point. But we could just do so much better, but it really needs to be rethought from scratch. And I would probably take one of the big conferences of judges to think about it, and just politically, it would be almost untenable at the moment, at least. Maybe in a few years, things will have evolved to the point that the courts will be more ready. They're not quite there yet, although they are at least at the point of recognizing the need to rethink citation.
Yeah.
But we can move a lot faster in academia, especially in the computer sciences.
Yeah, I mean, this whole approach goes back to teaching a random older person how to use a normal Macintosh in the 90s. And I realized something that so easily becomes natural to us, double click here, click and drag here. In computer speak, you have to say, perform this action on this thing. It's natural to us, but if this thing isn't addressable, you can't really do it. If you can't sort of, click on it, if you can't. So what we're trying to provide here is an opportunity where we can give a richer structure to issue commands, perform this action on this thing of which I know has these attributes.
I think you're persuading me, Frode. I think Vint and Google can set as much computation going as they like on this data, but it has to be useful. And I think that's your contribution. It's not just making it usable, but it's making it usable programmatically for others to build new things over it. And a lot of the discussion about applying computational methods to text collections and so on doesn't think enough about what it means to be a human being actually interacting with it. So I think that's a point that may contribute to Vint's talk when he says it's more the computation. Here's an example. That's my current enthusiasm.
Yeah, that's nice for you to hear. I mean, okay, kind of going away from my area of comfort, an area I usually don't like, but let's talk about the analysis things. Imagine if all UK papers are school papers, any university student and up, have to be submitted in this format. I'm wondering if you can then do, let's say, annual large-scale analysis of this. Of course, you can already do this to an extent, but if you do sentiment analysis and you also look at what citations are used, you should get a mood of the entire student body. That could be perhaps interesting.
Yeah, I was just looking back. So it was a couple of years ago, I was involved in this so-called Exascale report, and I was looking at the examples we used It's never been published, unfortunately. It was an internal funders document. But just looking back at the humanities section, whoops, not computational aerodynamics, but these are the examples we talked about. The humanities research in Born Digital Archives. So one of this is relevant. I mean, when you talk to people working with text, particularly in digital humanities, a lot of it is digitized text or digitized manuscripts in some form, and of course that's sizable and important. But the amount of born digital content, for example, in a web archive, or for Pitt Wilcox in the National Archive, where they have the Digital Archive of Government, that stuff is growing massively, and we haven't cracked how to make good use of that yet, how to interact with it. So that's one. Then there's the corpus linguistics example, which talks about using the corpus to do linguistics research, talks about text mining, talks about building Q&A systems so you can query it, which is interesting because it's an interface thing. But again, I think Google will say they can do that already. That's the knowledge graph, etc. We could be building a big knowledge graph over the content.
Very interested in the corpus for linguistics, but mostly related to language learning. I feel like all of the textbooks, they don't use they don't seem to use, at least, the corpus of language, because gathering a data of conversational words and sentences and building it into a corpus is pretty difficult. Yeah. And that would be incredible for language learning, because then you could learn, the top 1,000 words, that not words by themselves, because I feel that's useless, but always words in context, so that you learn the words in a sentence structure that you can use right away. And also in different contexts of, home, work, shopping, all of these situations.
That's a nice example. What are the 1,000 words or 200 words you have to know to read all the hypertext literature?
Right.
That's interesting. And Raphael, a lot of that area. So this morning, Edgar, whom you all know, my beautiful baby boy who's 4, we went to a phonics lecture or lesson, or whatever you want to call it, from the teachers to us this morning. And they were telling us how they're going to teach the children to read and write. It's crazy. They start with the letter S, and it has to be the sound and the shape and all these things. They expect them to know all the sounds by Christmas. They're 4, right? So it's very different from when I went to school. But this school, and this is the reason I'm mentioning it here, not only are they really focused on different ways, and us parents are very involved, we have to do this, that, and the other, but it is actually a Jesuit school. Let's not go into religion necessarily, but we have to ask, especially on a bigger level, what kind of things do we want people to learn, right? The tools really do shape that. So if we're talking about humanities, what do we want people to discover in the humanities? How to be a devil? Probably not, right? It has to come into it somehow.
I find it a little ironic how we learn to read and write, but people don't read and write. Like the number of people that have been reading and writing, like in a general sense, I feel like it has reduced quite a bit. And if people just did that, we would have, a much better society.
I think it also depends on what kind of writing. I mean, a Facebook post is still writing, or a tweet. But just a little detail that was interesting. They only learn cursive. Everything has to start at the bottom and go up. So when they start connecting things, they're already writing in a connected way. And we are, of course, talking here about connected data, right? Just thought that was a bit poetic. Yeah, whether people are reading or writing enough, that's a fair point, Raphael.
Well, if I could screen share for a minute, I have a micro demo of situating Visual Meta on a web page.
Oh, yes, that's been an interesting discussion. I look forward to it. Thank you.
Hang on, let me just share screen, find the right one. Okay, can you see it now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Quadrangle.
Okay, so we have a little widget up on the top and that flips the page around so you can see the visual meta. Again, we have the button to take you out to the visual meta info website. Copy visual meta will load the visual meta onto the clipboard so it can be pasted into Author. I think we still need to have a bit of an offline discussion about what fields we want to add to visual meta for web pages so that we can make sure that Author will recognize them when they're coming in and going back out. Other than that, oh yes, also, if you change pages, the visual meta will instantaneously update to reflect whichever page on the website you've gone to, and you can swing back to the regular view of the page itself.
So fancy, Peter.
It's great.
Okay, so that's it for the moment.
Peter, I have to give you access to our API so you can see it in context of all our cards in the board, because that's something very nice.
I
appreciate
would be really
that.
interesting. One thing that I think we need to address at some point, and now is as good a time as any, is forever and ever and ever, people have been saying, add metadata, we can do stuff. And then people don't bother add the metadata. Right, that seems to be a human problem. I would say that it takes more energy to organize information, than to create information, right? So
Yeah,
in
I
this
agree.
context, one of the kind of founding principles of visual meta is that the manuscript document should already have this. It should know the headings. All you need is to write your name and stuff. You do that once and it remembers it, right? That's really key. I guess, Peter, for what you just shown, an interesting issue we can keep discussing is how the user would write that stuff in. You know, would it be a WordPress plugin or where would it go? That would be really, really interesting. Because citing from the web, as we all know, is very unpleasant at the moment.
I think we should have an NPM module to generate the visual meta from a JSON object just containing the field values.
Yeah, I'm thinking more about how the HCI, the user experience, would be for that to happen. I think Dave just turned into a ghost.
Fro, the way we've been thinking about it is we do it in two ways. The first way is automatically extracting whatever information we can from the metadata or the header of the pages or whatever structure the content uses. And then from that, it fills in the blanks that are possible to fill in with automatic, not extraction. I don't want to say extraction because it's not really extraction, but it's just connecting the dots. And then whatever is blank, then the user has the possibility to fill it in, to complete the either checking if the metadata is accurate or adding additional metadata. So, and then there's always going to be a field where you can add custom because not one size fits all. It's never like that. So then in the custom you could add a parent field and the children field. That way you can add at least in unstructured content, but at least it's there, right? So then you can do what you will later on.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Oh, and also, I don't know if you noticed it in the demo, but that little QR code in the bottom dynamically adapts to whichever page within the website you're looking at. So if I put that in because if somebody is watching a demonstration or seeing something on a Zoom call, they could snap the QR code and then that would take them to the actual web page that they were looking at. Then from the web page, they can go in and flip the card around to get to the visual meta.
Yeah, well, that's very cool.
And I don't know whether we'd want to have a QR code as a graphical field inside Visual Meta. That's something to also think about.
Yeah, the question would be when to extract it, when it would be useful, of course. But that's interesting. So Dave, in your experience, how much interest and how much activity is there in born digital humanities documentation these days? I'm guessing that must be growing, right?
Yeah, it is growing. A sign of the importance of it is that HRC, as our Arts and Humanities funders, are just doing a big scoping study to plan an infrastructure for born digital content, and they're about to invest in it. So it's, in a way, all the work we're doing now is creating the archives for the future, and those archives are born digital. And there's insufficient attention, even in projects that are examining the archives of the past, on what archive are they creating for the future. So we're seeing a big shift towards that, and this plays rather well into that. And then, as I mentioned before, the publishers and various operations like Scopus and Web of Science are also trying to do a lot of this kind of analysis. Their user interface is quite primitive.
So first, a brief further sales pitch. I know you're on board, and then a question. The further sales pitch is that Visual Meta is, of course, on a separate page, so it can be appended to any existing document without in any way altering it, which is important. And Peter has been looking into how to do hashes of the document to make sure you're really talking about it, and also looked at how we can do errata as yet another virtual sheet at the end of it. But now that we have the ACM and we're having different things happening, I feel more that we're in a storm, right? Human affairs and the laws of nature are stormy and difficult. In order for this, for example, to be something that the UK would adopt, would that be a matter of organizational stuff, or would it be about the big dream about what it can deliver? Or anything else? Where should we look?
It's a good question. And every country is going to be different. I think we, because of where we're starting with this in the UK, it will respect the different needs and cultures of different communities and be bottom up in a sense. There are some top-down mandates like open access, but they're not likely to do a top-down mandate on a tool. But yeah, I guess I'm in the right place to explore that. So I'll think about that.
Because I can dream that in this community, we always have some kind of deadline, usually around Doug's demo or something like that. But I could imagine that in 5 years, let's say, we do some massive presentation to some group, whatever. And what we really demonstrate is the content in the field that has been produced in the last 5 years with this augmentation is more findable, usable, connectable.
Yeah, that works. And I can see, I can anticipate various audiences for that. The competition in that space is a publisher like Elsevier, for example. I'm just choosing Elsevier because of the amount of content that they have, because as well as compiling that content and making services available, they will do data science over it, and they will sell that as a consultancy. So if a higher education institute or a funder wants to know something about what their money is being spent on or what effect it has, and do some data science on it, the publishers are doing that. So interestingly, so that's what the ecosystem looks like.
Yeah, that's a scary and correct point, obviously. I mean, I think one of the main reasons Vint has been so supportive of this work is that it is as open as possible, because it's literally writing stuff. But you can't have an ecosystem of evolution with when they're in little tiny silos, right? So to support the extreme openness of it has to be, and that's where I think politics comes into it. I joke that what we're trying to do here is improve documents and communication by writing a few sentences at the end of a book. It kind of sounds like a joke because it has to be open and simple. But yes, publishers do have their ways, don't they?
Yeah, I do think that what you're discussing is an active and important contribution to the current editions. There's definitely something there. I have to go to another meeting with actually one of your Southampton colleagues, Frode, Tom Irvine. and due to
Okay.
speak to now, so I should have to disappear. So apologies. I feel that, as usual, we've had a discussion. You will go away and reflect, and you'll come back with a suggestion. And I look forward to commenting on that.
Well, this was really great because you are in the thick of it. So instead of us just going all over the place, your kind of framing of things has been very, very useful. So I thank you very much.
No, very welcome. Very happy to help, and I look forward to whatever happens next.
Yeah, and I look forward to talking to you again soon. See you later,
Great.
Dave.
See you soon.
Bye. Did I tell you guys that I'm reading a book about Metazoa? It's really interesting and it's very relevant. I didn't suddenly just become mad. The same guy who wrote a book called Other Minds about squids and octopuses and stuff has written this book. And he basically makes the point that consciousness can be small and then big. You know, it's not like suddenly there's consciousness. That's his point. And then he talks about the origins of life and the origins of cells. And at the scale he talks about is matter is not inert at microscales. In a cell, the water in there is moving fast and furiously in terms of how it interacts with everything else. Each single molecule in there is hit by fast-moving water molecules 1 trillion times a second. So the way that they manage to get something happening is not by directing movement, but just kind of trying to get directions for where generally to go. And I think that is so frighteningly analogous to what we're doing. You know, socially, if this takes off or not, in 20 years, it'll be easy to analyze retroactively why it did or didn't happen. It will be completely obvious. But right now, there's so many things in flux and so many technical, social, political, human, all these things. It's really quite frightening how extremely volatile it is. So that's why I'm really grateful that Dave came in on the call today with a bit of kind of a reality check.
It was a very good point you made, Frode, about how you're going to be creating the visual meta in the first place. I think we should be able to create a grammar-driven interactive user interface to ensure that basically an inverse parser to guarantee that any visual meta that someone's creating is going to be syntactically valid visual meta, so they won't have to think about it. Now, there are two ways you could go. One, you could use a graphical blocks-driven user interface where you basically represent the different visual meta components as jigsaw puzzle pieces, and you graphically snap them together to compose your final visual meta structure. And the pieces will only snap together and connect if they're in a valid position. The other possibility is to have a finite state machine driving an interactive parser that will ask you questions and basically prompt you through a text dialogue. I'm not sure which of those two is the best way to go. And it might be possible to have them working on a shared data model so that you could either be playing with the block view or talking in the dialogue, and the two would be kept in phase and synchronized at all times. So you have your graphical representation of the visual meta and a textual representation of the visual meta.
Yeah, that's interesting. We also, I mean, the reason I'm stressed about his presentation is that I don't want him to just feel that he's presenting author and reader as my software, because that's nice, of course it is, but it isn't really addressing the big picture. And of course, in author, it's easy. A visual meta is exported pretty much automatically, right? But we can't get everyone else to do that. So what you're talking about, ways for that to be possible with web pages, which are crucial too, and so on, is, yeah, it's difficult. It has to be super easy to make. We agree with that, right?
Yeah.
Oh, definitely. Definitely has to be as close to zero effort as possible.
Yeah.
If we think about visual meta in different media contexts, then, for example, how would a visual meta for a podcast look like for an audio file? Or how would a visual meta look like for a YouTube link? Maybe you're using it as a reference for something. So how would that look like? sure, there's the simple things that you can get, the title of the video that is right there, but how about, the and then the content that is being said. And then this goes back to that corpus of information, because we're getting a lot of different applications from all of the companies that are making it easier and easier to transcribe audio. So when somebody launches a podcast, it's getting a little more common to find a written version of the podcast if you choose to read, what was discussed instead of listen to what was discussed. And then once that becomes automatic in pretty much all audio, then we can start, analyzing the text and pinpointing the words to use that as material for metadata to add into visual meta to to structure and to find it again and all those things. So I like to come up with these use cases, even if they're not true today, because it gives us a clearer picture of where we might end up going and what's the low-hanging fruit. What's
let me think about that, but also please just give me 1 quick minute. Sorry.
Okay.
So I'm working on my dissertation in the area of disability and stuff. So I had submitted a draft to Froda about it's about being able to participate in real time, and it's having that text-based interface thing. So as you said, like with captioning and just the human-centered artificial intelligence, and how can we keep getting better at that, at the automatic transcription. And then there's actually a whole art of descriptive video too. So trying to convey what's happening in video to somebody who's visually impaired is that's a huge challenge there.
And then I have a friend, Carl, that works. He transcribes videos. So part of it is automated, but part of it is it's human done, right? And then he tells me that he has to add the unsounded, the ums and the ahs and all of those things. But there's a whole different part of it that goes into cinema, it goes into theater, it goes into scripts, because then you're defining scenes and objects and places, and then all of those things, you have to bring in people that used to work in cinema, because that's exactly what it is. How do you describe a scene? What plane are you seeing? What's the angle? What's the distance?
You want to have some consistent ways of doing certain things too.
Exactly, definitely, yeah. But
So-
that's very cool.
Use cases.
Does anyone remember back to the days of projecting multi-reel movies? Back when I was in college, we had University Cinemas as a club on campus. And one of the interesting features that most people don't even notice is that when you get near the end of a reel of film,
Yes.
in that old style, there'd be
Yes.
several dots that would flash for a microsecond on the screen.
Twice.
Exactly. Now, maybe we could come up with some little cluster of dots or something that we could superimpose on video when we're shooting it to signal when we're changing topic or something, to make it easier for the system to automatically extract that information. So that'd be almost like a visual meta overlaid on video.
That's very interesting, because in some ways it's sort of like a QR code for video, but it's only temporary. It's fast enough and slow enough that you can capture and extract information from it.
Because that dot system really worked beautifully, and it was so subtle. The audience never even noticed it. But when you're sitting in the projection room and you're looking for it,
Oh no, I
What
noticed
was the
it
name of that?
every single gosh darn time. You knew there was a major pause in the movie because they couldn't do that in the middle of dialogue or action sequence. Yes, thank you for bringing that up, Peter. That is very interesting.
What was the name for that, Peter? I'm very interested in.
we just
looking
called them
for
the dots. I don't know whether there was an official
The
term
dots.
for it or not, but you could just be
Video
watching for the
dots.
dots.
That's Very, very interesting, but also, yeah, but you know, QR codes I don't like because they have no inherent meaning. They certainly have a use and many uses, but in terms of visual meta, I really want to lean towards the in 1,000 years people can relatively easily figure it out. So there's nothing wrong with having one full frame of visual meta in the beginning or end of a video. Like maybe the very last frame or second to last frame, so it stops on black for those who prefer that. Or we can use a degree of steganography and have it black, but not entirely, some kind of a pattern, but someone who knows it's there can read it, as in overlaid. You still have the words, but it's not necessarily plain. I don't know, but you're stretching it in a very fascinating direction. But also, while we're mulling over that, the kind of scenarios I think Raphael mentioned we have to look at. And right now I am working on aspects of my PhD around this. I don't mind obviously writing down some scenarios for, you know, obviously I've done end user, you know, copy a citation, etc. But to write down scenarios for large scale use, you know, if we could all do that, that would be really, really fascinating. And I do think 10 million. Yeah, sorry.
I'm going to have to get on another meeting in a couple of minutes. Just letting you know.
Unfortunately, me too, which is stressful, but I look forward to seeing you guys on Friday. Will you join us on Friday as well, Carl, same time?
Yes, it's 11 to 12 Eastern then, because I was an hour early.
Yeah, and I saw it, but I was in another meeting, so I couldn't reply to you until afterwards. But okay.
Yeah, we'll be on the daylight savings here. Why we still have that.
Right, yes. Okay, well, let's adjourn for now and just think about scenarios for large scale interactions in environments where documents have something like this. Wonderful.
Great.
All right. Thank you, guys. Thank you.
Raphael's gonna make a point. It looks
Thanks,
like
everyone.
you
Have a
an
nice
idea.
week.
Yeah, Raphael, we'll also try to meet up for some marketing talk this week, potentially, right? Or have
Yes,
we put that in the
Wednesday, right?
diary? It's, oh yeah, because of your, yes, fine. Okay, excellent.
Yes.
Bye, guys.
Okay,
Bye-bye.
take care. Stay safe.
You too.